The first transmission was garbled, a crackling sound followed by a voice, shaken, urgent, then silence. A chilling silence that no one at Mission Control wanted to hear. For a few agonizing seconds there was nothing. No telemetry, no heartbeat signals, no status reports. Just an eerie void where communication should have been, then suddenly a burst of static. And in that static something faint, muffled breathing, hurried voices, a fragment of a message. Not responding. We have the signal cut out. Again. The room at Mission Control went from quiet tension to full-scale alarm. This wasn't just interference, something was wrong. Very wrong. When humans leave Earth, they place their trust in technology, in engineering, in thousands of hours of meticulous preparation. But space is not forgiving. When things go wrong beyond our atmosphere, they don't just go wrong, they go catastrophic, and for the Crew-9 astronauts there was no margin for error. So what happened? How did a mission that started with such high hopes spiral into disaster? To understand the gravity of the situation, we need to go back to the beginning, the launch. Crew-9 was a highly anticipated mission, a joint effort between NASA and SpaceX. Aboard the Dragon spacecraft were 4 astronauts, seasoned veterans and eager newcomers alike, all tasked with a 6-month stay aboard the International Space Station. Their objectives: conduct cutting-edge research, test new spaceflight technologies, and continue humanity's ever-expanding presence in low Earth orbit. The launch itself was flawless. The Falcon 9 rocket roared to life, lifting the spacecraft through the atmosphere at breathtaking speeds. Millions watched as the engines burned bright against the morning sky, propelling the crew toward their destination. Within minutes, they had cleared the dense air of Earth's lower atmosphere. Weightlessness set in. They were on their way. From inside the Dragon capsule, the crew marveled at the sight of Earth shrinking beneath them. Their journey was unfolding exactly as planned. They went through standard checklists, ran diagnostics, and prepared for the crucial next step, docking with the ISS. But then something changed. It started as a minor systems alert, nothing urgent. A slight deviation in pressure readings, something the onboard computers flagged but didn't classify as an immediate threat. The astronauts acknowledged it, logged the data, and continued their approach. However, as they edged closer to the ISS, that minor deviation became an anomaly. Pressure fluctuations increased. Sensor readings became erratic. The crew noticed an unusual vibration, something that shouldn't be happening in a spacecraft designed for near-perfect stability. And then came the first real warning sign. A sharp jolt rocked the Dragon capsule. It wasn't turbulence. There is no air in space. This was something internal, something mechanical. The crew exchanged uneasy glances as their display screens flickered. Mission Control received their first fragmented message. We just had a standby, checking systems. A pause. Then, we might have a problem. It was the last thing anyone wanted to hear. What happened next would turn a routine mission into a desperate fight for survival. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to invite you to be part of this journey. Every great mission starts with a few brave explorers, and right now Cosmic Whispers is just beginning. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. Now, let's return to the moment everything changed. Inside the Dragon capsule, warning alarms started flashing. The pressure anomaly had escalated into something far worse. One of the crew members, an experienced flight engineer, quickly accessed the diagnostics panel. What they saw made their stomach drop. The Dragon's life support system, responsible for regulating oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, was no longer functioning properly. Something had caused a sudden depressurization event, and in the vacuum of space that was a nightmare scenario. At first, the crew held on to the hope that it was just a sensor malfunction, but then came the second jolt. This time it was more violent. Loose objects floated chaotically inside the cabin. The astronauts struggled to keep their bearings as the spacecraft trembled. Then the worst possible sound, a low, metallic groan from the spacecraft's hull. Mission Control was now Fully alert, they demanded updates, but the crew was too busy responding to an unfolding emergency. Another fragmented transmission. Something's wrong with the... Then static. Silence. Mission Control was staring at blank screens. No telemetry, no communications, no sign of... Crew-9. The clock was now ticking. Every second mattered. The question was, could they bring them back? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. At Mission Control, dozens of engineers and analysts scrambled to re-establish contact, their fingers flying across keyboards, their voices overlapping in a frantic chorus. On their monitors, the Dragon spacecraft was still visible, drifting against the black abyss of space, its approach to the International Space Station now in question. Then, finally, another burst of static. A voice. Faint, but there. Houston. We have a major situation. The message was strained, the breathing heavy. It was clear the astronauts were fighting against something, their words clipped and urgent. But before Mission Control could request clarification, the signal degraded once again, cutting off before they could transmit a response. What exactly was happening inside the spacecraft? Inside Dragon, the situation had turned dire. The pressure, loss wasn't just a minor issue, it was worsening. Air was escaping, but from where? The hull appeared intact, the seals hadn't ruptured. The astronauts quickly activated emergency oxygen supplies, but that was only a temporary fix. One of them, the mission commander, floated toward the primary control panel, activating a series of rapid diagnostic scans. A chill ran down their spine as they saw the results. It wasn't just the pressure. The Dragon's entire environmental control and life support system was failing. The air scrubbers, which remove excess carbon dioxide from the cabin, were no longer functioning. That meant every breath the astronauts exhaled was slowly turning the capsule into a suffocating death trap. And then the alarms started blaring. Not just one, multiple. Systems were failing one after another, like a slow-motion chain reaction. Mission. Control received another transmission, this time with an unmistakable edge of fear. Houston, we are losing life support. We need immediate assistance. Oxygen levels dropping, decreasing stability. The message cut off again. The realization hit like a gut punch. If the Dragon couldn't stabilize itself, the crew wouldn't just lose communication, they would lose consciousness. The International Space Station was just a few miles away, so close. Salvation they could see but might never reach. Mission Control erupted into action, coordinating with the astronauts aboard the ISS. Could they deploy a rescue maneuver? Could they use their own systems to remotely stabilize Dragon? 1,000. Possibilities were debated in a matter of seconds, but then another jolt. Inside the Dragon capsule, the crew clung to anything they could as the entire spacecraft lurched sideways, sending instruments and loose objects tumbling. The docking trajectory was compromised. Instead of moving smoothly toward the ISS, Dragon was now drifting off course. The astronauts' situation had just gone from bad to catastrophic. One of them managed to grab onto a side handle, stabilizing their position as they turned toward the rest of the crew. They were all there, wide-eyed, breathing hard, desperately trying to figure out their next move. And then they saw it. A single crack, small, almost invisible, along the interior paneling near the hatch. This was no software failure, no simple pressure anomaly. Dragon was leaking. A microfracture in the hull, likely caused by micrometeoroid debris, had compromised the spacecraft's structural integrity. The depressurization was slow, almost imperceptible at first, but it was relentless. If they didn't act fast, they wouldn't have enough breathable air to survive the next few minutes, let alone make it to the ISS. The commander grabbed a nearby patch kit. Their training kicked in. Every astronaut rehearses emergency scenarios, but nothing prepares you for the real thing. Hands shaking, they sealed the crack with a temporary adhesive. It wasn't perfect, but the pressure loss slowed. It was a temporary victory. But then, as if the universe itself were conspiring against them, another system failure alert lit up the cabin. The thrusters, critical for adjusting their trajectory, had gone offline. The astronauts exchanged a look. They needed those thrusters to dock with the ISS. Without them, they were nothing more than a drifting metal coffin. Mission Control was fully aware of the problem. They rushed to run calculations. Could the ISS astronauts manually reel them in? Could Dragon's backup systems be rebooted remotely? Every passing second mattered. Then, finally, one last transmission from the crew. "We have a plan. Attempting." Emergency thruster ignition, but before they could finish, a final jolt, a sickening sound of something snapping, and then total silence. The video feed from Dragon flickered, then black. The crew was gone. For a moment it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. The video feed from Dragon had gone dark. The telemetry vanished. Inside Mission Control, the room was deathly silent. Then came the voices, urgent, overlapping, desperate. "Lost. All signals. Checking backups. Can we re-establish contact? Try the ISS relay. We need eyes on that spacecraft." From Earth's surface there was nothing anyone could do but wait. Wait and pray that somewhere, inside that drifting capsule, 4 astronauts were still alive. On board the ISS, the crew had been listening in horror as the situation unfolded. They had been expecting the Dragon to dock within minutes, but now it was nowhere in sight. One astronaut rushed to the cupola module, the panoramic viewing station facing Earth. They scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of the spacecraft. Then they saw it, a shadow moving against the distant glow of Earth. Dragon was there, but it wasn't moving toward them anymore. It was drifting away. Inside Dragon, the crew was fighting to stay conscious. The loss of power had triggered an emergency blackout, and the cabin had plunged into near total darkness. Only the dim glow of backup indicators flickered around them, barely illuminating their faces. They were still strapped in, still breathing, but only barely. The sudden jolt they had felt just moments before had been the final failure of their main thrusters. Without them, there was no way to steer, no way to adjust their trajectory. They were no longer a spacecraft. They were a piece of space debris spiraling further into the void. The commander gritted their teeth, forcing themselves to focus. They knew they had minutes, maybe even seconds to fix this. Their visions swam. As they turned to their crewmates, "We're not dead yet," they managed. "We can still do this, but how?" Their only remaining hope was the backup thrusters, small secondary propulsion units designed for minor adjustments, not major course corrections. If they could manually trigger them, they might be able to reorient the spacecraft just enough to get back on a docking trajectory. The problem? The main control system was down, and that meant the only way to ignite the thrusters was manually. One astronaut unbuckled their harness and floated toward the emergency access panel. Their movements were slow, too slow. The oxygen deprivation was already taking its toll, but they forced themselves forward, hands trembling as they reached the panel. The latch was stuck. They took a deep breath, painfully shallow, as if their lungs had already forgotten how to pull in air, and yanked with everything they had. The latch released. Inside the panel were a series of manual switches. Each one controlled a different system, some of which they could not afford to activate by accident. One wrong move, and they could shut down the emergency oxygen supply entirely. Their vision blurred. Which switch was the right one? The numbers swam in front of them, shifting and distorting as the carbon dioxide levels crept higher. They had seconds. The astronaut reached out, and then the spacecraft lurched. For a terrifying instant, they thought they had made a mistake. But then they heard it, the unmistakable sound of thrusters firing. Dragon jerked slightly to one side, then again, as the emergency propulsion system sputtered to life. The backup thrusters weren't built for precision, but they were working. They were pushing the spacecraft in some direction. The question was it the right one? Mission Control saw the change immediately. Dragon is moving. Telemetry coming back online. The ISS crew sprang into action. If Dragon could get just a little closer, they might be able to use the station's robotic arm to grab onto it, something that had never been attempted before in an emergency. But there was still one problem. The spacecraft's air supply was nearly gone. Inside Dragon, the astronauts' movements were slowing. Their minds felt heavy, sluggish. Even as their ship inched closer to salvation, the reality was setting in. They might not be awake when they got there. One of them reached for the communications panel, forcing out one last transmission. "Houston, we're losing..." Silence. The spacecraft continued drifting toward the ISS. Inside, the crew had stopped moving. The countdown had reached 0. Time was running out. On board the ISS, the astronauts moved with practiced urgency. The robotic arm, the Canadarm2, had never been used in a live crew rescue like this before, but they had no other choice. If they didn't act now, the crew of Crew-9 would drift beyond reach, beyond hope. Inside Mission Control, a tense silence filled the room as engineers and flight controllers worked in tandem, directing commands to the ISS crew. Every adjustment of the arm had to be precise. Dragon was tumbling slightly, not just drifting. If they missed even by inches, they would be forced to watch helplessly as 4 astronauts floated away into the darkness of space. One of the ISS astronauts gritted their teeth, fingers tightening around the joystick that controlled the robotic arm. Sweat beaded on their forehead. They had trained for this. Simulations, drills, countless hours of preparation. But never, under these conditions, never with human lives hanging in the balance. The arm extended, its mechanical joints flexing as it reached for the spacecraft. Dragon was close now, too close. If they miscalculated, it could collide with the station, causing catastrophic damage to both. Back on Earth, millions of people were watching. News stations had picked up on the emergency. Families of the astronauts were holding their breath, staring at screens, desperate for a sign of life, a final correction. The robotic arm's claw extended and latched onto Dragon. A roar of relief erupted in Mission Control, but it was far from over. The capsule was still unpowered. Its systems were failing. And inside, the crew was unresponsive. The ISS crew worked swiftly, using external umbilicals to transfer power into Dragon's systems. Lights flickered inside the capsule. Oxygen levels stabilized. But there was still no movement. Mission Control waited. The ISS crew waited. The world waited. Then, a hand twitched. A slow inhale, then another. The mission commander's eyes fluttered open. The others stirred, groggy, gasping, blinking against the dim light. They were alive. Barely, but alive. It took over an hour to fully secure Dragon to the ISS airlock. When the hatch was finally opened, the ISS crew rushed to help, pulling the weakened astronauts to safety. The medical checks began immediately. Low oxygen levels, dizziness, exhaustion. But they had made it. It wasn't until later, after hours of debriefing and emergency procedures, that the full picture became clear. The eye. Failure had begun with a micrometeoroid impact, tiny, barely detectable, yet devastating in its effect. It had cracked a critical panel, triggering a slow but steady depressurization. The cascading system failures that followed had nearly doomed the crew, leaving them stranded and helpless. But their training, their resolve, and the quick actions of the ISS crew had saved them. As the world breathed a collective sigh of relief, one question remained. What if this had happened further from the ISS? What if there had been no backup thrusters, no robotic arm? The Crew-9 disaster was a stark reminder. Space is unforgiving. The smallest oversight, the tiniest fragment of debris, can turn an ordinary mission into a fight for survival. And yet, humanity keeps going. We keep pushing forward, not because space is safe, but because it is unknown. Because we are explorers, risk-takers, dreamers. But next time, will we be so lucky? If this story captivated you, if the danger and triumph of space exploration fascinates you, then don't stop here. Like this video, share it with others who love the mysteries of the cosmos, and let's discuss: how can we make space travel safer? What should we do next? Because one thing is certain, this won't be the last time humanity faces the void and fights to survive.